Learn English through stories are one PDF. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents: Children of India by Janet Harvey Kelman. 1. Chapter 1. The Story of the World. 2. Chapter 2. The Story of the Ganges. Chapter 1. The Story of the World. India is a very old land, and those who live there look far back into the past. They listen to the stories that were told of men and gods in those old days, and follow the customs that were followed then. There are many gods in India, and many priests who serve in their temples and at their shrines. The priests have more power over the lives of the people than the gods have, but custom has far more power than either gods or priests. No one can tell how many hundreds of years have passed since the stories that rule the lives of Hindu children today were first told. Long before the earliest time of which we know anything in the history of our islands, there were wise thinkers and clever workmen in India, and the men and women of that land think of them and of their customs with awe and reverence. And because much of the life of a Hindu child today is the result of the thoughts that have come from that far past time, we must listen to some of those old stories. Before America was discovered by Columbus, men here had strange ideas about the shape of the world. Men in India had thought of that too, long before anyone in Britain did, and this is the picture of the world they made for themselves. They saw a beautiful large lotus flower held up on the back of an elephant, in the midst of 7 seas. One sea was of salt water and another fresh, and these two were the only ones that were at all like the seas of earth. One of the others was a sticky sea, for the waves that broke on its shores were of sugarcane juice. Another was clear and sparkling with dancing waves of wine. Then there was an oily sea of melted butter, a flat sea of curds, and a beautiful white sea of milk. But no one had looked at these strange seas, nor had anyone seen the great elephant that held the lotus flower on his back. Only the flower itself at the center of all was seen or known. India to the south and the other lands to the north, the east and the west of the Himalayas, formed the petals of the world lotus, and at its center amongst the great snow mountains the god Siva sat on his throne on Mount Meru. On pilgrimage to the mountain. There is one special mountain there, to which pilgrims go, and they hold it as sacred as if it really were the ancient Mount Meru. It rises from a grassy plain, and a deep ravine cuts it off from the other mountains. High up it is covered with snow, but towards the foot great cliffs of rock stand out bluish-purple against the whiteness, in bands round the mountain. Near the base, there is a broad dark band made by a very high cliff, and the priests point this out to pilgrims. See, they say, the mark of the ropes of the demon who tried to drag away the throne of Siva. And the pilgrim gazes with awestruck eyes, for he sees not only the marks of the demon's rope, but also, in the narrower bands higher up the mountain, the coils of the serpent that he has often seen in his images of Siva, and in the ragged edges of the snow-clad peaks and the icicles that hang from the glaciers, he sees the matted hair of the god. He is tired and weary, for it is months since he left his home in the plains. First he marched through tangled jungle, through grass 3 times as tall as himself, and under great cane stalks and feathery bamboo trees. In these early stages of his walk he sang, and shouted to frighten away the heavy sleepy bear, and to scare the quick-limbed panther that might be resting on any overhanging branch. Then he climbed up through forests of dark cedar and pine, with the white flowers of the magnolia and the wealth of rhododendrons bright against the dark tree stems. On and on he went into the cold gray passes, where his fear of wild beasts was lost in the fear of the spirits of the mountains, and he walked in silence, and all lest avalanche or storm should prove to him their anger. For he felt that he was indeed amongst the homes of the gods. Each moment as he mounted higher, new snow-clad peaks rose before him, and those he had already seen seemed higher and greater. His heart was filled with the dream of a rich land somewhere amongst these glittering heights, to which his soul might go after death, if only his pilgrimage should win him merit. So, as the sun sent flashes of light across the snowy peaks, the weary man plucked up courage and stepped out more bravely, till at length through a last ravine he saw the hoary head of the mountain he sought, and as he saw it he tore from his threadbare loincloth a little rag to tie to a bit of scrub. Other rags hung there, for many pilgrims when they reached that spot had been so poor that they had nothing left to offer at the sacred bush, except a bit of the cloth they wore. And so he added another, and left the rags to flutter there in the cold winds of that high land, while he hastened on to finish his pilgrimage and walk round the sacred mountain. Other places are sacred besides this mountain that stands for Mount Meru, the center of the world lotus. Each rock and stream has its spirit, and everywhere amongst the mountains there are shrines and temples and far-off holy places to which pilgrims go in their endless search for rest. Through all the land of India the mountains of the north are held sacred, and often the eyes of men who will never be able to reach them, as pilgrims look longingly towards those homes of the gods. Chapter 2. The Story of the Ganges. Very long ago, though the mountains stood at the world's center, and India lay at their feet, there was no Ganges river, and the plains lay bare and fruitless. The god Siva then lived on the top of a high mountain, and spent his time in thought. Up over his head above the mountains the princess Ganga lived free as the wind. She was the daughter of King Himalaya, and the air nymph Manaka, and so her home was in the air among the heights. At that time there lived a very wise man on earth, and as he looked at the burning plains of India, and thought of the air princess, he said to himself, if she would only give up her freedom and become a river, how she could enrich and purify the earth. And when he had thought this out, he began to pray to the god Siva to send Ganga to earth. Siva granted his request, and the princess floated down to earth. She touched it first at the mountain top where the god sat, but he caught her in the tangled masses of his hair, and for ages she could not escape from them, so the wise man could not see the answer to his prayer. But long afterwards, she broke away from her prison on the mountain top, and flowed down under the glacier ice and over the bare gray rocks. She made her way through the ravines, and the great pine woods sprang up as she flowed. Rhododendrons grew on the banks at her coming, and at the foot of the mountains the jungle stretched down to be nourished by her waters. But it was out on the open plain that the Princess Ganga really showed her power. There, fields of wheat and rice and poppies and lentils grew up wherever she flowed, and wherever the streams that joined her from the mountains made their way to reach her. Groups of fruit trees and bamboos grew too, and men came to settle in villages beside them, till the plain of the Ganges became a great, bright, busy place with herds of buffaloes watched by little boys, with oxen yoked to the plow, and other oxen carrying the precious river water to pour it on fields that were far from the banks. But the Ganges is far more than the bringer of food and life to the Hindus, for the sage prayed that the river might flow to bear away the sin of men, and that is a far greater thing than only to bring food. But we must remember that sin means something different to a Hindu child from what we think of as sin. To him, it does not mean unkindness or cruelty or lying or even murder. It means breaking the rules of custom. Because of the sacredness of the Ganges, men bathe in it and pray to die beside it, that after their bodies have been burned on its banks, the ashes may be scattered over its waters and allowed to float away far out to sea. They hope that if that happens, their souls will be lost in the great unknown spirit in which they believe, as the river is lost in the ocean. Every bend of the Ganges is sacred, and each place where a stream joins it is yet more holy. Pilgrims go from its mouth to its source and back again. If they walk, they take 6 months to the pilgrimage, but if they wish to win more merit, they lay themselves down on the ground and cover miles of the bank with their bodies instead of with their feet, and that takes far longer. There is a great gorge where the Ganges flows out onto the open plain. Near it stands the town of Hardwar, and on the Hindu New Year's Day, dense crowds of pilgrims gather there in honor of the birthday of the river. They bring the ashes of the dead whom they have loved with them, and as they throw them on the flowing water, they feel that they have done for their friends the very greatest thing they could do. Then, at a certain moment, each pilgrim struggles to be first to bathe in the river. The most sacred city is Benares, and all the year long its streets and temples and riverbanks are thronged with pilgrims. They bathe and throw sandalwood, sweets, and flowers into the river. Some of them wear garlands, and, as they bathe, the garlands rise from their breasts on the water and float down the current. Then the pilgrims go round the sacred city, a walk of 10 miles, and afterwards they offer flowers and gifts in as many temples as possible. After all is done, they turn homewards across the plain, unless they are so old or so ill that they may hope to die soon. If they are, they stay on in the strange city in poverty and pain, for to die in Benares is a better thing to them than to be amongst friends or in the home of their childhood. But flowers and ashes are not the only gifts that have been offered to the Princess Ganga. Once little living babies were thrown to her waters, and old men and women have been left to her mercy by those who were too heartless or too poor to feed them. These terrible offerings are not seen now, for the British government has forbidden anyone to throw any living person into the river.